Today, I'm going to talk about how to run book discussion groups. Welcome to Missing the Mark, where we look for meaning in strange places. I'm Christopher. This video is answering a question asked by viewer Whist on, he's hoping to get together a Bible study and asked for advice on how to run book discussion groups. Now, caveat, I only have limited experience with actual discussion groups, especially ones where people who aren't already friends who know each other extremely well show up. My experience with this is limited, but I've learned a few things in particularly attending my local Chesterton Society. Haven't done that for a while, unfortunately, just owing to circumstances. But it's a great place. Had a lot of valuable, great discussions. Met great people there. So that's my primary experience with it, and where I'll be drawing lessons from. So just getting that out of the way. So there are a few main challenges that you want to that you want to address. So the first thing is going to be, and they all form or come under the umbrella of organization, being well prepared and organized. So the first thing is you'll want to clearly specify ahead of time what you're going to be doing at the meeting. This way, the people who are going to prepare, and depending on who you have, it's probably going to be a minority of the people. But the people who are going to prepare will thus be able to prepare about the same thing. And the people who won't prepare, they're no worse off. Because probably a majority won't prepare, I recommend structuring it where you begin with at least some amount of reading or summary or something along those lines. For something like a Bible study, because the Bible is just so incredibly rich that it doesn't make sense to go very far into it at all, because there's just going to be so much to talk about in a short time. There it makes a lot of sense to just go over the reading, read together. So some people be comfortable reading out loud, others not. There's a wide variety of fluency in being able to read out loud and to be able to read well. It's going to depend. Make sure everyone can follow along. If you're not having somebody who's especially skilled at reading being the person who does the reading. And again, that's up to preference and whether you cycle through or whether you just pick somebody where they're really good at reading, so you just have them do the reading or whatever. However it seems to work out for the group. Doing that reading together, and also if everybody can have it there to follow along with, is going to be very helpful. For stuff that's less the Bible and other things that are much less dense than the Bible is, it may be impractical to read 4 chapters at the beginning and so of your meeting, and so they're like having somebody who's in charge of putting together a brief summary of what happened. Because if you're going to discuss chapters 10 through 14, well, you don't have to worry about spoilers. The whole idea is that everyone read it, and so we're just going to recap for those who may not have read it, or just to jog everyone's memory at the beginning. So putting somebody in charge of writing a recap or an overview to just read that, present that at the very beginning, to make sure that everybody knows what's going on and is sort of on the same page, as it were. It's a really good starting point. To be able to start there. You don't want to take a really long time there, because this is not like a reading. This is a discussion group, I'm assuming, not a reading group, where you're just there to be read to. This isn't like an audiobook club. At least, so I am assuming from the question here. And so you don't want to spend overly long on this. Usually it's a good idea, depending on how long you have. You want to spend anywhere from about 5 to 15 minutes on that portion of it. General recommendation I have too is try to dive in sooner rather than later. Like some brief starting prayer never hurts, by the way. A starting prayer also gives you like a formal point at which you are definitely beginning now, because that's another thing. Like as people are filtering in, there's conversation. When do you get started? Human beings need ceremony in order to operate together. So some sort of ceremony, like, okay, let's get started, does work. Opening prayer is also great for that. Anything that has that sort of ceremonial aspect that signals, okay, we're actually beginning the thing now, is good, because then everybody knows what they're doing. I do recommend taking any sort of business, and especially this can be useful to discuss while you're waiting for people to come in, if it's not absolutely critical for everyone to hear it. Otherwise, keep the business stuff about like future meetings and just what's going on in people's lives and other stuff like that to a minimum. Is good. Like, it's not bad to include that and gives a sense of community, but like again, have it prepared and keep it very brief. Then the recap, and then when you get to discussion, there are two things that you need to be able to do. You need a leader. You need some sort of leader for this discussion because a leader has two jobs that they have to do. The first is if nobody has anything to say, they need to start talking about things that will then prompt other people to respond and get them thinking, get things moving, and so on. Because it can be a lot of people can find it awkward to not have a subject to discuss, or rather to not have a particular subject to discuss. When it's like this big open thing, then they sort of like I mean, there are lots of things I guess we could talk. I don't know. A lot of people fall into that basic thing, but the moment you start with a particular direction, then they'll have things to say about that, and then the discussion will get going. And you probably won't hit too many points where nobody has anything to say. But you need to be prepared, just in case you do hit one of those, to then say, like, okay, now let's take a look at this part here. And not just, let's look at this part, does anyone have anything to say about it? But let's look at this part, here's one idea. What do you guys think about that or have other ideas? And as long as you throw an idea out and give people something to react to, you are much, much more likely to then generate another discussion. And you do need, not every single time will work. So you need to be able to do that a few times. So that's on the one side. The other thing that often happens in discussion groups is they have a very strong tendency, just due to human frailty, to wander off topic and wander very far off topic. And sometimes, depending on how quick you are on your feet, you can relate wherever the heck you end up to the topic and sort of bring things back that way. In more extreme cases, you can say like, I think we need to, like as interesting as this is, we're here to discuss this other thing. And now you just use the same technique about like, let's look at this section. How about, this, there's this idea. What do you guys think of that? Because if you just tell people like, stop talking about the thing you're talking about, that's very negative. It's not very pleasant. And you're putting the onus on them to like come up with something new to say. So if you can use the previous thing that the leader needs to be ready for, recognizing where it is to either steer things back if at all possible. And that's the ideal. To say like, if you can possibly like say like, oh, the thing you're talking about, this really connects over to this part of it, to bring people back that way so that you're not telling them that they were wrong, so you're not being negative. Because, we're all animals, and so negative reinforcement tends to be discouraging. And if, when you're here at this, at the book discussion group, and you get lots of negative reinforcement, you're going to want to stop showing up. Just, that's the way it goes. Lots of negative reinforcement means you don't want to be there in the future because you want to avoid that. And so to the degree that you can redirect things rather than stop them and move to a new thing, you will keep it more pleasant for everybody involved. It will be more interesting. And not that like you have to be deceptive about it. You're not trying to like trick people into thinking that they never digressed. But if you take somebody's digression and relate it back to the topic, they really will not mind nearly as much getting onto it. So a very common one, a very common temptation will be to talk about politics, and usually to complain about politics. Where a ton of digressions often go is in the direction of somebody who really wants to complain about something. And now that they're around people where they share a bunch of commonality, that tends to bring out the complaining in people because they feel safe and they feel community. And complaining is an attempt to try to like get community to you. It's complaining is signaling that you've got problems, and so trying to bring people together with you in order to feel like you're not alone and like your problems aren't so bad. And so that's why this sort of thing tends to bring out complaining, and politics is just one of the most fertile fields for generating complaints that exists in human endeavors. And so there's also things like people trying to date or what have you, but that tends to have some more personal elements that makes people shy of talking about it, except in some context. So it's not the politics is not like the most complaint. Politics is not the thing that generates the most complaints. necessarily, but it is the thing that tends to generate the most social complaining that I've seen. And so that's especially a thing where you don't want to tell people like, oh, your concerns don't matter, because when they're looking for like the love of the group here to reassure them about the things they're worried about, telling them like your concerns don't matter to us is a very negative experience. So that's especially where you want to try to A, head it off, and B, redirect it when you see it sort of going in those directions. Because if you redirect it back on topic, but especially as I said, by relating, if at all possible, the thing they're complaining about, to the subject matter in some way, and it doesn't have to be like a real tight relationship. Like, you can relate it back to like, that does seem to be kind of like this, although, I mean, it's not exactly the same thing. And here's a way in which the actual thing that we're here to discuss is different. That on its own can be enough that it's a gentle redirection, because you are finding a connection, and it may not be like a complete connection. And you may even, eventually say, okay, it's not all that related actually, now that we're talking about it, but like you're back on the subject that the group is there to discuss, and so you're going to be much more likely to get some profit out of that thing. So those are, I think, the main things that will help a discussion group to go well and to be profitable and to be there. The basic problems that you face are either not having anything to talk about or talking about the wrong things, pretty much, and that's the stuff I just described. So the one other thing, as a practical matter, is have what I recommend is essentially like a sliding window. Like, we're going to, because you don't want too little material and then to run out of things to talk about, and you don't want so much material that you don't get to most of it. And so what I recommend is like a sliding window. Like, over the next several weeks, we're going to be working on this section, and then if you finish it early, then you can plan for what's going to happen in a future week. Like, okay, we actually got through this faster than I expected, so let's just we'll wrap this up. We're not going to really be missing much of it. We'll just make sure to include the last few points in this, because we're doing in 3 weeks instead of, I thought it would take us 4. So next week we'll start on the next section. That sort of thing, where it's a sliding thing. Like, we're going to discuss this chapter. If you're in the Bible where everything's so dense, we're going to discuss this chapter, and in over the next 4 weeks, and then you just see how far you get in that first week, and then you pick up from wherever you left off in that next week, and then you pick up from wherever you left off. That sort of sliding approach has a lot going for it in anything that is dense, anything where you really want to make sure to actually get into the material. To allow you to speed up or slow down as appropriate. Whereas, like, if you're discussing different books at different times, it gets really awkward. Like, well, we missed 3/4 of this book, but next week we're going to be doing this other book, so oh well. That's not nearly as satisfying. You often miss out on a lot. It's not the end of the world if you do it that way, but sort of planning for the unpredictability, so to build the ability to slide things around into your schedule is also very helpful, so that you don't want to like bog down. You don't want to finish your material and then still have 2 more weeks to like have to make stuff up in order to talk about it if you budgeted too much time. So that's the one other thing that can come up really in discussion groups, and you just want to do that. One other thing can be useful if this is a public sort of group where your members will change on a frequent basis. Like, you'll frequently be getting a new person or two showing up, a lot of regulars, but new person or two. It is worth it having an introduction section where everybody introduces themselves. And what can be a good way of doing this, because just like, everybody introduce yourself, it's very, very awkward, because, talk about yourself. Well, I don't really expect anyone to find me interesting, so here's my name, and that you haven't really introduced yourself very much. What can be really good as a technique for introducing, for the introduction, is, give your name, where you're from, and answer this question. One of my favorites that I had asked was, what's the nicest thing that anyone's ever said about you? And that one got some really, because just a few times, there's a really wonderful woman who runs our local Chesterton Society, founded it and has been running it ever since. And she's really great. But a few times she's like when she's busy, she delegated to some other members the running of a particular meeting, and so like that was one of the times that I ran a meeting. That was the question I went with, and got some really fascinating answers. Because the great thing about this is it's a reflective question, because it's not what do you think is great about yourself, and you are not in relating what somebody said about you. You are not even saying that they're correct. You're not promising that they are right. So it really is a question that does not bring up the problem of modesty, because you're not actually making any sort of truth claims about yourself. You're only making a truth claim about what another human being has said, possibly in error. But, and here's the thing, it also relates to it helps to show what you value. And so, in a nice positive way, but so it's, even if somebody was wrong, it was really sweet of them to say this to me. In fact, that was mine. It was a person who said, "You never do anything by halves, do you?" And I mean, it's not true. I do. There are plenty of things I don't, give my all to. But like, man, like that was really, that's really awesome. Like I wish I could live up to that. And so, like, it's a neat sort of thing because it reveals things about the person, both about what other people, what somebody thought of them, and also what they value in this, without being committal as to it actually being true. And so it's nor does it require a person to say, so you don't have to affirm that the person was right in this. And so it doesn't bring up the question of modesty. And so like that one is a really neat question. It's by no means the only question you can ask. Having different ones, especially for the sake of people who've been there for a while, can be a good idea too. But like that sort of thing, just add a question into, name, rank, serial number, and also, favorite Russian novel in which the protagonist doesn't die, except not something that would require, that sort of arcane and specialized knowledge. So, that's pretty much everything I can think of. As I said, I have limited experience, so take this all with a grain of salt, but I hope this helps. And until next time, may you hit everything you aim at. Hey, so now that the video proper is over, just a quick practical thing or two. If you know anybody who could get some value out of this video, it would be very kind of you to share it with them, to, give them the link. And if you'd like to see more of the stuff that I make, you can subscribe. And if you, curious thing about the way YouTube works, if you want to be notified of all the videos, what you have to do, there's I think in that direction, there's a little bell icon. You have to click on that and move it to always, because what subscribing normally means on YouTube is actually two things, and most people find this counterintuitive, which is why I'm explaining. The first thing that it means is that if you go to your subscriptions page, all the channels you're subscribed to, their videos will show up in reverse chronological order, so the most recent first. The other thing it means is a recommendation to YouTube's recommendation engine to consider recommending videos from this channel to you more, perhaps, than it otherwise would have. And a lot of people find that surprising. They think like, well, isn't subscribing, subscribing? And the answer is, well, no, except in the sense of if you go to your subscriptions page, it's not subscribing in the traditional sense, like when you would subscribe to a magazine and then you would get all of the issues mailed to you. It's not subscribing in that sense, as far as like notifications and what YouTube recommends goes. It's like a kind of general suggestion that its recommendation engine, like, maybe consider that channel, perhaps. So yeah, that's the world we live in. Isn't technology grand? God bless you.